What if I told you that right now, in this very moment, you're carrying a weight that was never meant to be yours? Not because life is inherently difficult, but because you've been taught to believe in something that doesn't actually exist when you look closely enough. Joel Goldsmith, a spiritual teacher whose insights transformed thousands of lives, discovered something that challenges everything we've been conditioned to accept about pain, struggle, and human suffering. Think about it for a moment. How much of your day is consumed by trying to fix yourself, improve your circumstances, or escape from some invisible burden? Has this ever happened to you? You solve one problem only to find another waiting in the wings, as if suffering itself is an endless cycle with no way out. Most of us spend our entire lives believing this is just how things are. We accept anxiety, fear, and dissatisfaction as permanent residents in the house of our consciousness. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Here's where Goldsmith's teaching becomes revolutionary. He discovered that 90% of human pain exists only because we believe it must. Not because circumstances are genuinely unbearable, but because we've been living with a case of mistaken identity so fundamental that we can't even see it. Imagine living your entire life believing you're a single wave on the ocean, vulnerable, temporary, at the mercy of every storm. You'd spend all your energy trying to protect yourself, fighting against other waves, desperately seeking stability in an inherently unstable form. But what if you discovered you were never just the wave? What if you realized you were the entire ocean, and the wave was simply one temporary expression of your infinite nature? This isn't metaphorical poetry. This is the literal truth about consciousness that Goldsmith taught. Every burden you carry, every problem you're trying to solve, every version of yourself you're trying to fix or improve, exists only within a framework of separation that falls apart the moment you examine it closely. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might completely transform your relationship with suffering itself. The most counterintuitive part? Goldsmith taught that the very act of trying to heal yourself, change your circumstances, or even become enlightened is what maintains the illusion. These efforts, no matter how sincere, reinforce the false belief that there's someone separate who needs fixing. But what happens when you search for this someone and discover they're nowhere to be found? Let me walk you through something that might sound strange at first, but bear with me. Because this simple exercise has the power to completely shift your entire relationship with pain. Close your eyes for just a moment, or if you're watching this while doing something else, simply turn your attention inward. Now, find the person who's suffering. Not the feeling of suffering itself, but the actual sufferer. Search carefully through your consciousness. Look for the one who's worried, the one who's afraid, the entity that's carrying all these problems you believe are yours. Take your time. Where is this person located? Can you point to them? Can you touch them? Can you find any solid, permanent thing that you could honestly call the sufferer? What happens when you really do this exercise is nothing short of remarkable. You find thoughts about suffering, yes. You find sensations in the body that might be uncomfortable. You find memories of past pain and projections of future worries. But the actual sufferer? That concrete, independent person who owns all these experiences? They're nowhere to be found. It's like searching for the horizon and discovering it only exists from a certain perspective. But you can never actually reach it or touch it because it was never a real location to begin with. This isn't a philosophical game or mental gymnastics. This is direct experience that reveals a hidden truth about the nature of consciousness itself. There is awareness of suffering happening, but no actual problem haver at the center of it all. And when you can't locate the sufferer, something extraordinary occurs. The suffering doesn't have anywhere to land. It's like trying to deliver a package to an address that doesn't exist. The delivery fails because there's nobody home. There never was. Now, I want to go even deeper into this revelation because understanding what you actually are changes everything. Think of a movie theater. Whatever story plays on the screen, whether it's a war film with explosions and chaos, a romance with heartbreak and passion, or a tragedy filled with loss and despair, the screen itself remains completely untouched. The screen doesn't get damaged when buildings explode in an action movie. It doesn't cry during sad scenes. It doesn't fall in love during romantic moments. The screen simply is, allowing all these dramas to appear and disappear without being affected in the slightest. If this resonates with you, hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to sharing consciousness teachings from Joel Goldsmith, Joseph Murphy, and other profound spiritual teachers. Your true nature works exactly the same way. You are not the character in the movie of your life. You are the screen on which all characters, all experiences, all dramas appear. Every thought, every emotion, every life circumstance is content appearing in consciousness, but consciousness itself remains pristine, untouched, unlimited. The transformation in perspective here is profound. Most people spend their entire lives completely identified with the character, believing that what happens to the character is happening to them. But the character is just an appearance, a temporary role being played out on the unchanging screen of awareness. Think about the implications of this for a moment. Every problem you believe you have exists only for the character, not for the screen. The screen of your awareness has never been broken, never been damaged, never actually suffered. This isn't about denying that difficult. Things happen in life. Pain appears, challenges arise, uncomfortable situations unfold. But these are all experiences happening in awareness, not to awareness. The distinction might seem subtle, but it creates a fundamental shift in how you navigate every single moment of your existence. When you recognize yourself as the screen rather than the movie, suffering loses its grip because there's nobody there for it to grip onto. Write in the comments, "I am the screen," if this perspective is starting to make sense to you. This recognition opens doorways that most people never even know exist, and what we're about to explore next reveals exactly how this understanding dissolves specific patterns of suffering that you might be experiencing right now in your own life. So how do you actually apply this understanding when you're caught in the middle of real-life challenges? When anxiety is gripping your chest? When fear is racing through your mind? When you're genuinely worried about something that feels very real and very urgent? Goldsmith gave us a practice so simple that most people dismiss it at first, but those who actually use it discover it has the power to short-circuit the entire mechanism of personal suffering in an instant. The next time you find yourself trapped in worry, fear, or pain, pause everything for just a moment. Don't try to solve the problem. Don't try to think your way out of it. Don't try to make it go away. Instead, ask yourself one question. Who is aware of this suffering? Just pose that question and wait. Look for the answer. Search for the one who's experiencing this difficulty. And here's what happens when you genuinely engage with this inquiry, rather than treating it as some abstract spiritual concept. The whole structure collapses like a house of cards. You cannot find anyone actually suffering because the sufferer was always just a belief, a habit of thought, a story you've been telling yourself for so long that it felt absolutely real. When you cannot locate the person who has the problem itself loses its foundation. It's like a mirage in the desert that disappears the moment you get close enough to examine it. This isn't denial. This isn't pretending difficulties don't exist. This is seeing through the false identity that made those difficulties seem overwhelming in the first place. Let me share a real example that demonstrates the profound impact of this shift in perspective. There was a woman named Margaret who came to study with Goldsmith in a state of complete financial terror. She was drowning in debt, opportunities seemed non-existent, and every day felt like a battle for survival. Her entire consciousness was consumed by lack, scarcity, and the crushing weight of monetary pressure. She tried everything to fix her situation: budgeting strategies, side hustles, positive affirmations about abundance, but nothing changed her internal experience of poverty and fear. Then she encountered this teaching about resting as awareness rather than trying to solve problems from the level of the problem. Instead of focusing on how to get more money, she began practicing simply being aware of her financial fears without identifying as the person who had them. Morning after morning, she would sit quietly and notice the thoughts about bills, the anxiety about the future, the panic about her bank account, but she would rest as the awareness observing all of this rather than being the character, experiencing it. What Margaret discovered during one of these quiet moments changed everything. The awareness that was witnessing her financial terror was itself completely free, completely abundant, completely untouched by any circumstance. This wasn't a concept she read in a book. This was direct experience. The consciousness observing her fears didn't lack anything. It wasn't worried. It wasn't diminished by her bank balance. It was whole, complete, and inherently abundant regardless of external conditions. From this inner transformation, something remarkable happened in her outer world. Within 6 weeks, unexpected opportunities began appearing. Not because she manipulated anything or tried harder, but because her entire energetic signature had shifted from desperation to wholeness. People started reaching out with job offers. Solutions she hadn't seen before suddenly became obvious. Doors opened naturally because she was no longer pushing them away with the frantic energy of someone who feels fundamentally lacking. The real revelation for Margaret wasn't even that her financial situation improved, though it did dramatically. The deeper truth she discovered was that her sense of security had never actually depended on external circumstances. She had found the source of true abundance within her own being, a wellspring that could never be taken away by any bank statement or economic downturn. Drop a comment saying, "Inner abundance," if you're starting to see how this shift in consciousness creates real transformation in the tangible world. Because what we're exploring here isn't just theory or feel-good spirituality. This is about discovering a source of stability and freedom that exists regardless of what's happening in your life circumstances. And understanding this becomes even more powerful when we look at how it applies to other areas where people typically suffer most. Money is one area where this consciousness shift creates dramatic results. But perhaps even more compelling is what happens when people apply this understanding to psychological suffering that's been with them for years or even decades. Consider someone like David, who lived with chronic anxiety for 15 years. 15 years of waking up with a knot in his stomach, of dreading ordinary situations, of feeling like danger lurked around every corner even when nothing threatening was actually happening. He tried everything the conventional world offered. Therapy sessions that analyzed his childhood, medications that dulled the symptoms but never touched the root cause, meditation techniques that promised relief but only gave him temporary respites before the anxiety came roaring back. Then, David encountered this completely different approach. Instead of trying to cure his anxiety, manage it, or understand why he had it, he began investigating something far more fundamental. Who exactly was anxious? This question led him on a journey behind the scenes of his own consciousness. Every time anxiety arose, instead of getting swept away by it or fighting against it, he would pause and search for the anxious person. He found racing thoughts about potential disasters, yes. He found tightness in his chest and tension in his shoulders, absolutely. But when he looked for the actual entity who was anxious, the permanent self who owned this condition, he found nothing solid, nothing he could point to and say, "This is the anxious me." This discovery was initially shocking, then gradually became profoundly liberating. The anxiety patterns continued appearing for several months, but David's relationship to them completely transformed. Instead of being overwhelmed and controlled by anxious thoughts, he watched them arise and dissolve in the space of his awareness like clouds drifting across the sky. They lost their power to dictate his behavior, to shrink his life, to dominate his emotional state. After 8 months of this practice, David noticed something extraordinary. Anxiety rarely appeared at all anymore, and on the occasions when it did surface, it felt like weather passing through. Uncomfortable perhaps, but temporary and fundamentally unable to touch the core of who he was. This same principle operates in relationships, where emotional pain can feel even more intense and personal. Sarah's story reveals how powerful this shift becomes when applied to the intricate dynamics between two people. After 23 years of marriage, her relationship was failing. The connection she once cherished had deteriorated into constant conflict, resentment simmering beneath surface politeness, and a growing sense that maybe they had simply grown too far apart to salvage what they once had. Sarah could have done what most people do: fought harder for the relationship, demanded that her husband change, or given up entirely and walked away. Instead, she applied Goldsmith's teaching to her emotional turmoil. Rather than trying to fix her, marriage or fix herself or fix her husband, she began resting as the awareness that witnessed her hurt, her anger, her disappointment. She didn't try to change these feelings or pretend they weren't there. She simply observed them without identifying as the wounded person experiencing them. Through this practice, Sarah discovered something unexpected. The awareness observing her marital problems was itself completely whole and unbroken, no matter how much pain the character in her life story was. Experiencing, the consciousness witnessing it all remained untouched, complete, fundamentally okay. From this inner wholeness, her entire energy shifted. She stopped relating to her husband from a place of neediness, trying to extract love or validation or changed behavior from him. She stopped defending herself against his criticisms because she realized her true nature couldn't be threatened by anyone's words or opinions. If this video shifted something for you, give it a like. It helps. Others who are searching for this understanding find their way here. This transformation in Sarah's consciousness changed the entire dynamic between them without her trying to manipulate anything. Her husband noticed the shift immediately. The demanding energy dissolved. The defensive reactivity disappeared. And in the space that opened up, genuine connection became possible again in ways neither of them expected. Leave a comment saying, "Wholeness within," if you're recognizing how this inner shift creates outer transformation without force or manipulation. What becomes clear through these real examples is that consciousness work isn't about escaping life's difficulties, but about discovering a foundation of peace that exists regardless of what challenges appear. And this becomes even more practical when we understand specific techniques that make this recognition accessible in everyday moments. These stories of transformation reveal something crucial about how we can make this understanding practical in daily life. There's a specific technique that Goldsmith taught which might seem like a small grammatical shift, but it creates a profound change in how you experience everything. When pain arises in your body, notice the difference between saying, "My back hurts," versus recognizing there is an experience of back pain appearing in consciousness. Do you feel the subtle but significant distinction? The first statement creates ownership. It makes the pain personal, something that belongs to you, something that defines a part of your identity. But the second statement simply acknowledges an experience without claiming it as yours. This isn't just playing word games or engaging in spiritual gymnastics. This shift removes the false sense of ownership that intensifies all forms of suffering. When you stop claiming experiences as personal possessions, they lose their power to define and control you. Try this with emotions too. Instead of thinking, "I am anxious," recognize, "There is anxiety appearing." Rather than "I am sad," notice there is sadness arising. This grammatical change reflects a hidden truth about your actual nature. You are not the owner of experiences. You are the space in which all experiences appear and disappear, like weather patterns moving through the sky. The sky doesn't own the clouds. It doesn't become the storms that pass through it. Similarly, you are the unchanging awareness within which all states come and go, but you remain fundamentally untouched by any of them. When you practice this impersonal perspective consistently, something remarkable happens. The intensity of difficult emotions and physical sensations begins to decrease naturally. Not because you're suppressing them or pretending they don't exist, but because you've stopped adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from personal identification. Pain is one thing. My pain that defines me and controls my life is something entirely different and far more burdensome. Now, there's another dimension to this understanding that takes the transformation even deeper. When you're facing any problem in your life, Goldsmith taught a practice he called truth realization. This involves reminding yourself of what you fundamentally are beneath all appearances and circumstances. You can say to yourself, "I am not the body that can be sick. I am not the mind that can be confused. I am not the person who can lack anything essential." This might sound like denial at first hearing, especially if you're currently dealing with physical illness, mental confusion, or genuine material lack. But this isn't about pretending difficulties don't exist or that your body doesn't experience symptoms. This is about recognizing the deeper reality of your identity beneath all temporary conditions. Your true nature as consciousness is never sick, never confused, never lacking. These conditions appear in consciousness like images on a screen. but they cannot touch or alter what you essentially are. The power of dwelling in this truth realization is that it often dissolves problems more effectively than trying to fix them directly. When you align with reality, rather than remaining trapped in illusion, your outer world begins reflecting this inner clarity in practical, tangible ways. This isn't magical thinking. This is understanding that your state of consciousness creates your experience of life. When you rest in the truth of what you are, solutions arise naturally because you're no longer blocking them with the desperate energy of someone who believes they're fundamentally broken or incomplete. Think about the implications of this for a moment. Every time you identify as a sick body, a confused mind, or a person lacking resources, you're reinforcing an identity that isn't true at the deepest level. You're living as the wave that feels vulnerable and temporary, rather than recognizing yourself as the ocean that is vast, powerful, and complete. Drop a comment with the word truth if this perspective is shifting how you see your own challenges. Because recognizing what you fundamentally are beneath all appearances isn't just philosophy. It's a practical tool that changes how you navigate every difficulty. And this becomes even more powerful when we understand how to maintain this awareness consistently throughout daily life, especially when old patterns of thinking try to pull you back into identification with limitation. The challenge most people face when they first encounter this teaching is maintaining the recognition when life gets intense. It's one thing to understand consciousness principles while sitting quietly or watching a video like this, but what happens when you're stuck in traffic, when someone criticizes you unfairly, when unexpected bills arrive, when plans fall apart? This is where Goldsmith's insights become truly practical and powerful. Most of our suffering doesn't actually come from what's happening. It comes from our resistance to what's happening. Think about that for a moment. The traffic itself isn't causing your stress. Your internal fight against the reality that traffic exists is what creates the tension. The criticism isn't inherently painful. Your resistance to being seen in a way you don't want to be seen is what hurts. This resistance operates so automatically that most people don't even realize they're doing it. They think the circumstances are the problem. But the real problem is their unconscious war against reality. When you fully accept the present moment exactly as it is, without trying to change it or wishing it were different, something extraordinary happens. You discover peace underneath all the struggle. And here's what's counterintuitive about this. Accepting what is doesn't make you passive or ineffective. It actually makes you incredibly powerful because you're responding from inner stillness rather than emotional reactivity. A person responding from acceptance sees situations clearly and takes wise action. A person reacting from resistance is operating from fear, from defensiveness, from the desperate energy of someone who can't handle what's in front of them. Which approach do you think creates better outcomes? When you stop fighting reality, you can finally work with it skillfully. Your decisions become clearer. Your responses become more effective. Life starts flowing because you're not constantly swimming against the current anymore. But maintaining this state of conscious non-reaction requires consistent practice, and this is where identity anchoring becomes essential. Throughout your day, you need to repeatedly return to recognizing what you truly are. Set gentle reminders, maybe every hour or whenever you transition between activities, to pause for just a moment and rest as awareness itself, rather than getting completely lost in the drama of personal identity. Ask yourself, what am I beneath all these thoughts and experiences? This isn't a question that requires an intellectual answer. It's an invitation to feel into the presence that's looking through your eyes right this moment. That presence is your true face, your real identity, and it remains completely unchanged by any life circumstance. Whether you're experiencing success or failure, praise or criticism, health or illness, this awareness remains constant, untouched, fundamentally okay. You can practice this anywhere. While waiting in line at the grocery store, instead of getting lost in mental commentary about how slow the line is moving, return to awareness. During a tense conversation, instead of defending your personality position, speak from the spacious presence that cannot be threatened. While cooking dinner, washing dishes, answering emails, any ordinary moment becomes an opportunity to anchor in your true nature. The beautiful thing about this practice is that it doesn't require you to withdraw from life or add hours of meditation to your schedule. You're simply remembering what you are in the midst of whatever you're already doing. Over time, this anchoring becomes so natural that you rarely forget. The character in your life story continues playing their role, handling responsibilities, interacting with people. But there's a deeper dimension present that knows itself as the unchanging witness of all this activity. Write "I remember" in the comments if you're committed to practicing this awareness throughout your day, because the more consistently you anchor in your real identity, the less convincing the stories of limitation become. And this opens up possibilities for transformation that most people never access because they remain trapped in identification with the character rather than recognizing themselves as the awareness in which all characters appear. And understanding how to navigate the obstacles that arise on this journey becomes crucial. Here's something critical that almost everyone encounters on this journey, and if you're not prepared for it, you might mistakenly think you're doing something wrong when you're actually on the verge of a major breakthrough. When you begin practicing these consciousness techniques consistently, there often comes a point where everything seems to get worse instead of better. Mental turbulence increases. Old patterns of worry and fear that you thought you'd moved beyond suddenly come roaring back with even greater intensity. Doubts multiply. Your mind becomes louder, more insistent, more convincing in its stories of limitation. Most people at this stage think the practices aren't working and give up right before the transformation happens. But Goldsmith recognized this phenomenon and called it the darkest hour before dawn. This temporary intensification of mental noise is actually a positive sign that false beliefs are losing their grip on your identity. Think of it like a fever that spikes right before it breaks. The illness isn't getting worse, the body is mobilizing all its resources to eliminate what doesn't belong. Your ego, that sense of being a separate self with problems to solve and an image to maintain, doesn't want to dissolve. When it feels threatened by your growing recognition of your true nature, it stages what amounts to a last desperate attempt to maintain control. The mind throws everything it has at you: compelling fears, convincing doubts, dramatic stories about why you need to remain identified with limitation. This resistance can feel overwhelming, but it only has power if you feed it with your attention and belief. The key during this phase is persistence without struggle. Don't fight the mental turbulence. Don't try to make it go away. Simply continue returning to your awareness practice while allowing the storm to pass through. When you stop feeding the resistance with your engagement, it exhausts itself remarkably quickly. The intensity that felt unbearable yesterday becomes a distant memory a week later, and on the other side of this passage, you discover a freedom and clarity that wasn't accessible before. What makes this journey particularly interesting is that at a certain point, you realize you've been approaching the whole thing backwards. You've been treating awareness as something you need to achieve, consciousness as a state you need to attain through effort and practice. But here's the revelation that changes everything. You cannot achieve what you already are. If you find yourself straining, working hard, trying desperately to be aware, you're missing the fundamental point entirely. Awareness is the most natural, effortless thing possible. It's not something you do, it's what you are. Right now, in this very moment, you're using awareness to understand these words. You didn't have to learn how to be conscious. You didn't have to practice being aware. It's simply here, always present, the most obvious thing about your existence. Yet somehow, the easiest to overlook because you've been looking for something complicated, something you need to earn or develop. This recognition eliminates all spiritual striving. Enlightenment is not a future attainment that you'll reach after enough meditation, enough study, enough purification of your character. It's the recognition of your present reality. You're trying to find what's already here, achieve what you've never stopped being, become what you are right now. Can you feel the cosmic humor in that? The entire search collapses when you realize there's nowhere to go and nothing to get, because you already are what you've been seeking. This doesn't mean practices become useless. They serve as reminders, as ways of returning your attention to what's always been true. But the practices themselves become effortless once you stop treating them as means to achieve something in the future. You're not working toward awareness. You're resting as awareness that's already completely present and available. Leave a comment saying already here if this shift from striving to recognizing is landing for you. Understanding this effortless nature of consciousness opens up an entirely different way of approaching not just spiritual practice, but every aspect of life. And this becomes especially important when we examine the subtle ways we unconsciously resist our own freedom and why that resistance happens. Now we need to address something uncomfortable that explains why many people encounter this teaching, understand it intellectually, feel its truth resonating in their hearts, and yet somehow never fully embody it. There's a hidden resistance operating beneath the surface of consciousness that sabotages transformation before it can take root. Strange as it sounds, most people are unconsciously attached to their suffering because it provides something the ego desperately needs: a sense of identity and purpose. Think about it honestly for a moment. Who would you be without your problems? If you weren't the person struggling with anxiety, working to overcome past trauma, trying to improve yourself, seeking healing or enlightenment, who would remain? This question terrifies the ego because the answer threatens its very existence. The mind has built an entire identity around your difficulties, and it secretly cherishes this dramatic character even though the drama causes pain. A painful identity feels more substantial, more real, more significant than the simplicity of just being. The ego would rather be a suffering seeker with an important spiritual journey than dissolve into contentless awareness. It would rather be a victim with a compelling story than recognize itself as the unchanging witness of all stories. This addiction to problems, this unconscious investment in remaining someone who needs fixing, explains why people sabotage their own healing repeatedly. They approach consciousness teachings hoping to improve their suffering rather than transcend the sufferer entirely. They want a better dream, a dream where they're more successful, more peaceful, more enlightened, but they don't actually want to wake up completely from the dream of separation. Waking up means the character you've been playing dissolves, and that feels like death to the personality, even though it's liberation for your true nature. This resistance operates so subtly that most people don't even realize they're doing it. They wonder why the practices don't seem to work while unconsciously holding on to the very identity that creates suffering. They say they want freedom while clinging to familiar limitation, because at least limitation feels like something solid to be. The simplicity of awareness without content, of being without becoming, feels too empty, too meaningless, too threatening to everything they've built their sense of self upon. But here's what happens when you genuinely let go of this resistance and allow the recognition of your true nature to fully integrate into daily life. Your entire experience transforms in ways that are difficult to describe but unmistakable when they happen. Daily life becomes dominated by spontaneous gratitude for no particular reason. Not gratitude because something good happened, but gratitude simply for the miracle of existence itself, for the awareness that allows any experience to be known. Unconditional love begins flowing naturally because you recognize everyone as expressions of the same consciousness you've discovered yourself to be. Separation becomes obviously illusory when you see through it directly. Effortless peace becomes your baseline state, not something you have to meditate your way into, but something you rest in automatically, because you've realized it's what you fundamentally are beneath all surface disturbances. Problems still arise. Life continues presenting challenges, difficulties, situations that need handling, but they no longer disturb your fundamental well-being. You engage fully with practical matters while remaining inwardly free from attachment to outcomes or resistance to obstacles. Work transforms from something you have to do into something that flows naturally, often feeling more like play than labor. Challenges become adventures, opportunities to see what consciousness creates through your particular form. You live with incredible lightness because you've dropped the heavy burden of being someone who needs constant fixing, improving, defending. All that energy, previously spent maintaining and protecting a fictional self, becomes available for creativity, for service, for the simple enjoyment of being alive. You stop seeking outside yourself for happiness, fulfillment, or security, because you've discovered these qualities are inherent in awareness itself. Write "I choose freedom" in the comments if you're ready to let go of the addiction to problems and live from this recognition. Because what we're exploring here isn't just interesting philosophy. It's a direct invitation to step into a completely different quality of existence that's available right now, and understanding how this transformation ripples out to affect not just your inner experience, but your entire relationship with the world becomes the final piece. If you've made it all the way to this point, you're not here by accident. Something in this message resonated with a deeper part of you that recognizes the truth being shared. You're among the small percentage of people who are genuinely ready to see through the illusion of suffering and discover what you really are, beneath all the stories and struggles. This channel exists to share these kinds of transformative insights, teachings that don't just give you information, but actually shift your consciousness when you truly receive them. We dive deep into Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, Joseph Murphy's principles of mind, and other profound spiritual truths that have the power to completely transform how you experience life. If this video brought you value, if it opened something up for you that wasn't accessible before, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming. These aren't just videos. They're invitations to wake up to your true nature. And let me know you made it to the end by dropping a comment saying, "This was meant for me." I read every single comment, and there's something powerful about declaring your recognition publicly. It reinforces the transformation happening within you and creates a community of people who are genuinely committed to living from consciousness rather than limitation. If this content touched you, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find these teachings who are ready for them, and honestly, it lets me know that what we're sharing here is landing in the way it's intended to. There's a video right here that takes this understanding even deeper into practical application. Click and continue with me over there. Let's keep this journey of recognition going together.